What's up? Welcome back. You are following along as we build out this newsletter platform, and you found us in an episode where we're going to talk about webhooks. So for any payments integration, or for most payments integrations, you'll want to handle webhooks. But when we're talking about building a connect platform where we're going to facilitate payments on behalf of some other users, in this case, we're going to facilitate payments between a reader that is subscribed to a newsletter and the author of that newsletter, we want to ensure that we're definitely using webhooks. They're going to be critical for both the account onboarding process, but also knowing like when payments are succeeding and when we have customers that are subscribing or unsubscribing from different newsletters. And so what we want to do next is set up a generic webhook handler that we can use for several different sources. So if you're unfamiliar with webhooks, a webhook is a way that you can receive a notification about something that happened. A lot of people like to use the analogy of a phone number where your webhook handler is some code that is going to execute maybe on the phone when it receives a phone call, and the phone call might come from a specific source. And the way that you can receive phone calls is by taking your phone number, which is your URL, and plugging that into some source, or taking your URL of your webhook endpoint, sometimes called an endpoint, and plugging that into some third-party source. So in our example, we're going to be integrating with SendGrid. We're also going to integrate with Stripe. And in both of those use cases, we can go to either SendGrid or Stripe and enter in a webhook URL. That is our URL where we want to receive post requests of events that are happening on our Stripe account or our SendGrid account. So let's build out a generic webhook handler. And I'm going to, for today, assume that we're going to receive JSON payloads only. But in practice, you might need to handle, XML or some other sort of data format. But for today, we're just going to say that we have a model called event. And our event is going to have some data that is in the format of JSON, a source that is like, is it coming from Stripe or SendGrid or GitHub or Slack or any of these other providers. We'll have processing errors, which is going to be a text blob populated with any errors that happened while we were running our own code to process the event in the background. And then we'll have a status. This is going to be an enum value that will that gives us sort of a state machine for working with our event and making sure that all of our events are being processed, and gives us a way to see, are there any that need to be reprocessed or that failed? And so it gives us a lot of like retry logic. So we're going to generate that model and stick it in the database. And this is not going to be related to any specific users or anything, because this is just going to be a placeholder in the database for requests that we're receiving and processing. And that will create these events. Okay, the next thing we want to do is generate a controller that will handle these post requests from third parties. So I'm going to say, generate a controller called the webhooks controller. And it's not going to have any views. It will only have one action, and that is going to be create. That is where we're going to receive post requests. So if we open up this webhooks controller, a couple of things that are unique about this. Number one, we don't have any authenticated user. When the third-party server is making an API request to us, they're not going to have a server to send that to us. Okay, this is thank you, GitHub Copilot. Okay. It's like GitHub Copilot is sort of like a child that is at dinner with you, and they're like, I think this is what you mean. And they're like interrupting, but, oh gosh, come on. Now we need to do this. Now we need to do that. Okay. So we're going to say at event is, event.new, event params. Now let's actually just say, yeah, we're going to manually construct the event. So data is going to be params.toJSON. So that is going to be like the entire request payload. Then we're going to have, what else do we put in the schema? Okay, we haven't actually migrated this yet. So let's migrate the database, open up the schema, and at the top here, okay, so we have data, we have source, errors, status. Okay, so we'll go back to our webhooks controller. We have a source is going to be params source. And then our status is going to be pending. Okay. So let's look at our event model here. And we need to use an enum for our status. So it's going to start off in pending, and then we'll have processing, processed, and failed. So this will create a new event. In fact, we don't actually need to use new. We can use create bang Create bang is saying forcefully create this event. If it fails, then raise an exception, and hopefully the third party will retry sending those events. Another thing that was sort of populated for us automatically here was this skip before action for verifying the authenticity token. Typically, a Rails controller is going to verify the CSRF, or the cross-site request forgery token, to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. In this specific scenario, the third party is not going to have a form that they're submitting. They're just going to be sending a post request directly to an endpoint, and they won't have any authenticity token to send to us. And we're going to secure this endpoint in different ways. So for now, we're just going to say, skip that verification and don't do any authentication. Now we're creating the event, and we want to use our event job that was created in the last episode. And we're going to say .perform later for the event, and we're going to render JSON of just status OK. This is going to be sent back to the third party. So what's happening here is we're going to receive a request with a bunch of data. We're going to just stick the data in the database and then schedule a job that is going to run later. And that when that job runs later, we'll go and figure out what to do with the data, what automations to run, which things need to be updated in the database, which emails to send, Slack notifications, etc. All of that is going to happen in the background later so that we can quickly respond back to the third party. This keeps latency down and also allows us to offload stuff. So if we're getting like tons and tons of requests to our webhook controller, those will all just sort of like queue up in the background in the database and then be processed. All right, so this looks pretty good. We also need to add to our routes resources, webhooks, but we only care about create. And I actually want to add sort of like a custom route here. So what I want to do is say, if you send me a post request to webhooks/source, then I want that to go to the webhooks create. The reason I'm adding this :source here is that when we pass the webhook endpoint into any of these third parties, we can specify like, localhost 3. You can't use localhost, but whatever, you get the idea. Webhooks : Stripe, or webhooks : SendGrid or GitHub or whatever, right? Like, and then we will always know which source it's coming from. And that allows us to just use one webhook endpoint for all of our JSON webhook third parties. And then in the background job, we can build our own like custom router based on the source that will know how to handle all the different event types that we are going to register for and listen to. Okay, so now what we should be able to do is say, curl-x post to localhost 4242/webhooks/testing. And then we can pass in some data that's like, I don't know, this is a test. And let's see what happens. 4242, it's not 4242, it should be 3000. Okay, so we got back status okay. And if we look in the server logs, we received a post request to webhooks/testing. Now you'll notice that the source is set to testing here because that was the thing that was in the like dynamic segment of the path. And that ended up in our params, which is nice because that will also end up in the data that we're saving to the database. All right, so this actually looks like the way it got stored is nasty with all of these slashes. It's kind of like escaped or whatever, but yeah, I think that's because I'm not sure if this like -d thing is right. Let's also put like -h, like content type is application JSON. Does that help my cause? There we go. Okay. So now at least it's coming in and it looks like JSON. So then what was stored in the database, let's see. So event.last, reload. Okay. So this is a test, blah, blah, blah. So could we say event.last.data. So JSON.parse, is that going to work? Nice. Okay. So then we have, this is a test. That was the data that came in. It also includes the controller, action, source, etc. because by default, params includes all of these different keys. So this is like the raw params basically for the payload that's coming in, but all of that looks good. Now you'll notice also in the logs, we do see that the event job was enqueued and the event job was processed down here. So now we can see here's the event job. that was running this specific event. Now, the next step would be to go into our event job and say something like, if event.source is equal to testing, then like handle the testing event. And we can make a method here, handle testing event. Elif, or like otherwise, if the source was Stripe, handle the Stripe event. And we can make a method down here, handle Stripe event. And then we can start looking at things like, oh, what is the event type? Oh, if it's charge.succeeded, print out charge succeeded, et cetera, et cetera. So we will get to handling Stripe stuff later, but for now, let's see if we even, is the event type in the event? It is not. We will make a method on the event class that will figure out what the event type is, and we'll come back and handle this later. But for now, we know that we should be able to start adding sources here that will handle these events. So here we can just do like puts handling Stripe event. All right, so that is it for setting up our webhook handler. We're in a pretty good spot with webhook handlers, and we've got just a few more things to go. I think maybe what might make sense is, next to send our newsletter issue. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.